the GP30 is a 2,250 horsepower 4-axle diesel-electric road switcher built by the Electromotive Division from July of 1961 to November of 1963. The GP30 used a B-B wheel arrangement, meaning that it had two bogies with two axles each. The locomotive was built for the standard gauge railroads in the United States. The locomotive was 17.12 meters long, 56 foot 2 inches, 3.15 meters wide, 10 foot 4 inches, and 4.85 meters tall, 15 foot 11 inches. Each one weighed about 111,000 kilograms, 245,000 pounds. They could carry between 1,700 and 2,600 gallons of diesel fuel. This fuel powered the EMD 567D3 prime mover, a turbocharged two-stroke V16 diesel engine spinning an EMD D22 generator, which supplied electrical power to the four EMD D57 traction motors. The locomotives could produce up to 2,250 horsepower and could reach a top speed of about 71 to 83 miles an hour, 114 to 134 kilometers an hour. The GP30 was designed as a match for GE's U25B, a 2,500 horsepower diesel locomotive, which was more powerful than the current GP20. The U25B had an airtight long hood, single air intakes for cooling, and a pressurized cooling system which kept dust away from the engines. All this was also wrapped in a package that made maintenance much easier. This had garnered GE several orders for the new locomotive. This wasn't the only competition for EMD, however, as the 2,400 horsepower Alco RS27 was still on the market, though this would prove to be less than successful in the long run. To compete with GE, EMD's engineering department pushed their DC traction system to squeeze another 250 horsepower out of it. Even though the new EMD system wasn't as powerful as GE or Alco, their name certainly was. EMD was a very prominent name in the emerging diesel market, with such popular units like the E and F units, SW switchers, and GP7 all being very successful. EMD was banking on this familiarity with their name to improve their chance of beating out GE and Alco. The new locomotive would follow GE's example: sealed hood, central intake, and easier access. EMD used the GP20 frame and trucks, and the new equipment was placed behind the cab instead of lengthening the locomotive. In order to place this equipment without lengthening the engine, the locomotive had to be enlarged, and room was given in this large covered bulge added behind the cab. The locomotive would be styled by the GM Automotive Styling Center at Troy, Michigan, in order to ensure that the locomotive would look modern. This hump and heightened roof was added by the designers. The hump had air intakes for the central air system and the dynamic brake blister. If the engine didn't have dynamic brakes, it was missing the appropriate cooling air intakes, but the hump remained. The locomotive could be ordered with a short high hood, but at this point only Norfolk and Western and Southern were still ordering engines with the high hood. The locomotive was originally going to be called the GP22, but in order to make the locomotive seem more advanced, and because the marketing team claimed that there were 30 distinct improvements from the GP20, the locomotive was called the GP30, leapfrogging the EMD numbering system and GE's U25B number as well. A total of 948 locomotives were ordered in the US and Canada. Only 2 were delivered in Canada. 40 B units were also ordered for the Union Pacific. The GP30 was the first of the so-called second-generation EMD diesels. The GP30 kept EMD in a dominant position in the US diesel locomotive market, though it did lose a little lead to Alco and GE. 948 were built compared to 476 U25Bs, and not only were the numbers higher, but also in a shorter amount of time, as the GP30 stopped production in 1963, while the U25B continued to 1966. The locomotive was ordered by most of the Class 1 railroads in the U.S., with the largest orders being as follows: 120 from the Southern, 111 from the Union Pacific, 85 from the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe, and 77 to the Baltimore and Ohio. These were all Class 1s in 1963. Good old-fashioned vintage American railroading, am I right? Despite the consensus that B units were a fairly outdated concept, the Union Pacific ordered 40 as they continued to run their trains with matched sets rather than the more typical lash-ups of other railroads. 13 of those B units had steam heaters for heating passenger cars, and these were the only GP30s to receive such equipment. Prior to the Amtrak takeover in 1971, the Union Pacific would use the GP30B with the steam heaters on passenger trains where no E8s or E9s were available. This wasn't the strangest modification, though, as the Gulf Mobile in Ohio, Milwaukee Road, and Sioux Line had locomotives built with ARR Type B trucks from Alco trade-ins rather than the standard EMD Blomberg B trucks. As of 2015, there are still several in service, a testament to the quality of the locomotive, serving for more than 50 years, well past the 30-year design life of standard diesel locomotives. Furthermore, some railroads would rebuild them whenever they finally reached the end of their service life. One such rebuild program was the Burlington Northern's GP39 program, which built GP30s and GP35s to match spec with the GP39. This type of rebuild was not only done by the BN, but other lines did similar things, including the UP, Southern Pacific, Seaboard Airlines, Southern, and others. I'll talk more about the BN rebuilds in a bit, but I also wanted to mention the Chessie Systems GP30M program, which added new traction motors and downgraded them to 2,000 horsepower, which lasted into the CSX days in the late 1990s. Many of the CSX locomotives would be turned into road slugs, meaning that the prime mover was removed and the traction motors were powered by another locomotive, effectively doubling the pulling power while only using one powered engine. These were notably used in the Bone Valley in Florida and were popular due to their being much quieter than other locomotives. Sioux Line rebuilt 3 GP30s with CAT 3515 engines at 2,000 horsepower, designated GP30C, and Illinois Central Gulf Railroad rebuilt 2 in the early 1980s, designated GP26. As of 2018, they are in service on the Cimarron Valley. Going back to the BN, this was the most extensive rebuild program for the GP30. The reason BN did this to begin with was a need for modern, lower power units, likely for switching and local service. It sent units of their own and purchased ones to be rebuilt by EMD, Morrison-Knudsen, and VMV. These were known as GP39E, M, and V respectively. Changes included Dash 2 modular electrical control systems, new generators, and 645 power assemblies for the prime mover. This rated the new unit at 2,300 horsepower. These units are still in service with BNSF on smaller lines and local service. Santa Fe also did its own upgrades similar to the BN. Their upgrades saw a new horsepower rating of 2,500 out of the 567 D3 engines with the same power assembly upgrade. Amongst other upgrades, they received Hyatt roller bearings and single-class brake systems. The upgrade program was capped off with rooftop air conditioners and new horns, along with a new yellow bonnet paint scheme. These were designated GP30U for upgraded. 78 of these survived until Santa Fe and Burlington Northern merged, forming BNSF, and they were eventually sold off. In 2016, BNSF traded Larry's Truck and Electric, LTEX, 26 GP38s for 24 GP30Us for the GP39-3 rebuild program. The Reading, Blue Mountain, and Northern acquired 6 of these GP30Us from LTEX and designated them GP39RN. Several GP30s have been preserved, but unfortunately none of the UP's B units are among them. Some notable ones include Branson Scenic No. 99, Conrail 2233, Southern 2601, Union Pacific 844, New Hope and Ivyland 2198, and Western Maryland 501 and 502. Nice on the next video. Bye.